This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Xcast X-Files Podwatch. This is episode 76 of our series covering the entire run of the X-Files. Today, we're having a look at Signs and Wonders and Sein und Zeit. I'm your host, Carl Sweeney, and I'm joined again by Chris Knowles. Hey there, Chris.
Carl, good to be here.
Yeah, good to talk to you again as well. We're only doing a handful of these 7th season episodes together, so I just thought I'd ask you quickly, like, your general thoughts and feelings about the 7th season.
Well, it's really interesting. When the season aired, I was really tuned into it on a very strange level, and I can't quite explain it. I mean, it really seemed to resonate with me, like, personally, and it was weird. It was like things that were happening in my life would, like, be reflected in the show. And so, you know, at one point, I was really quite attached to the season. As time went on, you know, it's a very strange season. The tone is all over the place. They just can't seem to decide what kind of show they want to do. Yeah. And I think that hurts the season overall. It just has no identity. It has no, you know, it has no overall message or meaning to it. It's just kind of they're clearing out the drawers. Maybe there was a certain feeling behind the scenes that this was going to be the last season, you know, particularly with the fallout from the lawsuit and whatnot. But I don't know. It's just, at the time, it really struck me like it was particularly Sein and Zeit and Closure were just like I'd never seen, you know, anything that affected me the way that those 2 episodes did. But with the passage of time, you just sort of see that there's a great deal of confusion in the making of this season. I don't think anybody was on the same page. They were just trying to get the episodes done.
Okay, let's have a look at these 2 specifically. So the first one is Signs and Wonders. It's the 9th episode of the season. It was broadcast for the first time in January of 2000. It was written by Jeffrey Bell and directed by Kim Manners. And this is the episode which sees Mulder and Scully looking into the death of a man killed by poisonous snakes, and their investigation leads them to a fundamentalist group called the Church of God with Signs and Wonders. This is an episode you don't really hear people talk about much, or at least I don't, but it's always one that I've quite liked. What do you make of it?
I like it quite a bit in and of itself. It's a good, dark, season 2 kind of supernatural horror story. And the performance, I mean, Michael Childers, who plays Enoch O'Connor, is just absolutely amazing. And, you know, we have this interesting thing that I don't think a lot of people have really paid attention to, that throughout the LAX files, you have all these people from Millennium showing up. And in this episode, it's Tracy Middendorf, who was in the great Darwin's Eye episode. The only thing that I would really kind of find fault in is that it doesn't seem to me that David and Gillian were particularly tuned into this story. They seem to sort of just sleepwalk their way through it. They just don't seem engaged with the narrative.
I was going to ask you about that, because my memory of the series at this time certainly is that David Duchovny was getting a lot of criticism online for people who were saying he was phoning in his performances. I was just wondering how valid you think that was. Obviously, by the sounds of it, you do, as regards this episode.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, but you have to understand how just exhausting and exhausted these guys were. I mean, just all of these people, it's particularly David and Gillian, who really spent more time on camera than most series leads actually do in a show like this. So, I mean, I think it is a valid criticism, but I also, you know, understand that it was enough already.
Anyway, earlier you mentioned the performance of, was it Michael Childers? Is that his name?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's a very dynamic performance, and what this episode does really well, I think, is it keeps him and his church as, quite unsympathetic, but at the same time, you can understand why people would be kind of swept up in what they're saying, and Mulder and Scully have, their typical kind of slightly didactic conversations where they talk about, Mulder says something about someone offering you all the answers can be a powerful thing, and I don't know, I just felt they handled that side of things well.
Well, I think Michael Childers' performance really has a lot to do with that. He's the son of a Pentecostal preacher. So, he wasn't, he was just playing out, a drama that he was very familiar with from his childhood. I just want to make a point about the dialectic of this episode. And that's that there's one line where Scully makes about, some dismissive crack about people believing in flying saucers. And it's just like, really? I mean, she just spent like 3 episodes and, researching an alien craft off the coast of Africa, and she's making cracks about flying saucers now. Yeah. And it's just like somebody was asleep at the switch. That line should have just been like, come on, this is ridiculous.
I think you were saying to me in one of the other episodes that, Gillian Anderson was at this time, around this time, she was sort of saying, how is this still credible? That Scully's still kind of like putting up this resistance, One aspect of this episode that I really like, I think it's well put together, is like the juxtaposition of the 2 sermons, when you go from this very like vital, hot and heavy sermon to a much more buttoned down, kind of boring one. I think it's just a very economical storytelling. Could have easily been 3 scenes that kind of explain that to us, but I think it gets the message across really well. And I don't know, I just think Kim Manners did a good job here, some effective set pieces and some good scares. And this is the kind of thing I'd imagine, from what I've read about Manners, the kind of thing he like reveled in doing. Yeah,
well, he was a horror guy, and he really enjoyed being able to dive into that genre. And, one of his favorite episodes was Home. Yeah. And, he started off with Die Hand, Die Verletz. That was his initial... that was his baptism of fire on the X-Files. So I think that, he's really in his element. And the only thing that really kind of bothers me, and it bothers me about the LAX phase as a whole, is that everything really looks like California. This might not affect a lot of people from outside the United States, but, they're going to all these different, municipalities and locations, and everything really just kind of looks like Southern California. And it just always just distanced me from the narrative. Vancouver had this magical power to, anybody who's familiar with Vancouver knows it's Vancouver, but it had like this, almost like this magical energy, this ability to imitate other places that really have nothing to do with it. Either way you believed it. But, with the LAX files, I'm not quite sure I really buy that they're, in Tennessee or whatever.
Yeah. I sort of prefer, I think they get towards a bit of a better aesthetic for the series in the 7th season than the 6th.
Yeah, the lighting is much better. Yeah. They really nailed it. See, that's another thing that really struck me about the 7th season, is that the lighting is just fantastic. And, Rob Bowman was really involved in designing the new look for the show. And I think it just took them a long time to figure out how to get around this blaring sun of Southern California. And, they did have some luck later on in the season, when they were filming. It was like this huge deluge, this rainy season that hit Los Angeles. So, episodes like On a Me, you had that kind of Vancouver-esque look. But, the lighting, the tricks that they use to get around that blaring direct sunlight really give a lot of these episodes maybe a little bit more magical feeling than they would have normally had.
I've always been fascinated by, like in the 8th season, I don't think they replicate it exactly, but they get back to a more back to basics feel. And you can sort of see like an alternative path where they'd have tried to do that in season 6, where they wanted to pretend that nothing had changed, but instead they really lean into it in season 6, don't they?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you should say that, because there is an episode, which isn't a very good episode at all, but it's an 8th season salvage. And it's really not very good, but it's just amazing how it really looks like a Vancouver episode, the texture and the lighting. So again, back to this episode, I mean, there are a lot of very good aspects to this episode. I mean, it's great performances. It's it's an interesting twist. It's an interesting concept, but there are just like these LA era setbacks. The fact that the cast is exhausted. David and Jillian are really not getting along very well at all at this point in time, and you've got Southern California, which is always going to look like Southern California.
Was there anything else you wanted to bring up here, Chris? I mean, maybe just a quick word on Jeffrey Bell. I don't know, credited with 5 episodes, and he sort of alternated between like Whimsy, the Rain King, the Goldberg variation, and then this is probably the best of his standalones, I guess. He also did Alpha, I think was one of his, and there's another one in the 8th season.
Yeah, he wrote Salvage.
Yeah, it was Salvage, that's right, yeah.
Really not crazy about his work on the X-Files as a whole. I think he was part of like this circle with people like David Amon, who are sort of under Chris's wing. You had people who worked with John Scheiben and Vince and Frank, but I think you also had sort of another crew that was more under Chris's aegis, and that he would tend to rewrite their stuff. So there's a lot of stuff in this episode in Signs and Wonders that really feels very Chris Carter. You sort of hear his voice a lot in this. And I think that it might have been a much different story initially, given Jeffrey Bell's, he's more whimsical, he's more humorous. I think it might have been a more humorous story that was, in the rewriting process, became a lot darker.
So, Sein and Zeit is the 10th episode of the season. February 2000 is when it was broadcast, and it was written by series creator Chris Carter and Frank Spotnitz, and directed by Michael Watkins. And of course, this is the first part of a two-parter that will reveal, ultimately, Samantha Mulder's fate. This episode primarily concerns the disappearance of a young girl, Amber Lynn Lapierre. Okay, now this is an episode, or this two-parter anyway, is an episode you hear talked about. My impression is that it remains divisive. I don't fully understand some of the vitriol directed at these 2 episodes. This feels, I don't know, like a real breath of fresh air to me at this point of the season. I think it's fantastic.
Oh, I think it's a classic. I think this 2-parter is just a dead bang classic. I think it's probably some of the best work they ever did. Certainly some of Chris Carter's best writing. I think that in a lot of ways, Sein and Zeit is more effective than Closure. Even, Closure sort of wraps things up, and you have that astonishing performance by Anthony Heald as Harold Pillar, which is just, I think it's the best guest starring acting performance in the series history. But this episode, I think, is just phenomenal. It has just a pervasive mood, it's this pervasive feeling of dread that really, I think it's even more than, say, classic season 2 standalone horror. There's something just really disturbing about this episode. There's something that really gets under your skin, almost like you're steaming towards a freight train, and you can't get out of the way. There's a feeling that these characters are all having to deal with just existential terror and horror in their lives. The great thing about the walk-in motif, which is interesting because you have Mark Rolston in the character as Bud LaPierre, and he's also from Red Museum. So really, what we have here is you have like this motif of the walk-ins, and my very, very strong feeling, particularly in this episode, is that this is entirely a fantasy. This is people who can't face, the existential terror of loss and horrible things that happen to their children. That it's almost like a compensatory fantasy, and I think that you can play it either way. You could see it either as that, or you could see it as a supernatural intervention. Either way, it's terrifying. It's unsettling, and we talked about whether David was fully engaged. I think he's just absolutely astonishing here. I think his performance is, one of his series best. Duchovny could really pinpoint these very strange, liminal emotional states that most actors can't even necessarily perceive, and he could perceive them and play them just to the note.
Yeah, I also think it's one of his best. I was going to say that, whenever an episode in a similar-ish vein comes up, or, with a similar-ish or similarities in the narrative, so I'm thinking of Oubliette or Paper Hearts, and this one, you can't fault him.
And let's be clear. I mean, the emotions that he's tapping into are not actorly emotions. They're very subtle. They're almost literary emotions, I think.
I was going to touch on the walk-in. I mean, you mentioned the walk-ins. It seems to me that there are people who just can't get past the way that concept is described.
Let's be straight. I mean, let's really be clear about why people don't like this episode. Everybody wanted, or the people who don't like this episode, what they really wanted is they wanted a spaceship to land in the parking lot of the FBI, Samantha Mulder to come out and everyone to hug and everything's, happily ever after. I mean, they wanted happily ever after. Yeah. I think it's very clear from very early on that Samantha, was always dead. I think that episodes like Oubliette and even to a certain extent Irresistible, you really get the sense that this whole mythology is really about Mulder trying to deal with what he knows is the loss of his sister. I mean, this guy's an FBI profiler. He's a, top agent, top of his class, on and on and on. I mean, he has to realize that, she's gone, she's dead. And people just didn't want it to be like so ordinary and mundane like that. That's what, this whole idea of the walk-ins. I mean, what people don't understand where the walk-ins come from. Walk-ins are alien spirits, in sort of UFO lore and things like that. There's a woman named Ruth Montgomery who wrote a book about this. They're these alien spirits who come in and take over human bodies and on and on and on. So, I mean, they're really going deep into the, the paranormal, toy chest here. So I think it was just brilliant because she was always there. I mean, David Duchovny sort of makes a stray comment in that Inside the X-Files, that 5th season documentary about, how she is actually dead. I mean, he just sort of alludes to it, but I think she was always dead. I think the whole idea of this mythology and the arc of Samantha is like he just can't face it. He can't deal with it. He has to go around looking for reasons to not believe that his worst fears have come true.
I've seen a comment from one of the producers. I think it was Paul Rabwin, and he said that he was glad that they dealt with the Samantha storyline here because he felt that it had become kind of like a millstone around the neck of the series. Do you think it was sort of played out for longer than it should have been, or do you think it should have been focused on more, maybe?
They hadn't really even dealt with Samantha since Redux 2, so I don't know. It just seems a little strange. I mean, you'd have mentions here and there, but they weren't really actively pursuing the Samantha storyline. So,
just a few things I wanted to mention here. One detail that always kind of creeps me out is the way the character of Ed Truelove kind of enters the frame like gut first. I just find something about the way that's shot really unsettling.
Oh, yeah.
Kim Darby as Kathy Lee Tenke gives an effective performance, I think. I mean, the only other thing I've ever seen her in is she appears opposite John Wayne in True Grit, and she's like a teenage girl or something, I think. I assume she's had like a full career.
Oh, let's talk about Kim Darby for a minute. She was in an early episode of Star Trek, the original series. She did some great stuff, genre TV. She was in a classic horror TV movie called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, it was recently remade into a feature film. Brilliant performance, brilliant film. She was in also in a TV movie with William Shatner called The People, and this was a film about this woman who goes to teach, sort of like this Amish community, and she finds out that they're all actually aliens. I think that one of the inspirations for The Kindred comes from that TV movie. So I think that there was a really inspired bit of casting, and there's always like this sort of knowing undertone to when people like that are cast. There's always some sort of reference to the work that they were known for previously in their career. It's a brilliant performance. I think she plays it extremely well, but also it's very much a nod to her history and her previous work. To me, this episode is like so good. It's almost kind of hard to talk about because everything is working. I mean, the machine is firing on all cylinders. I think this is, and it was so shocking because there's such a sense of chaos and confusion previously to this two-parter that you kind of felt like the show was kind of slipping away from itself. It really lost sight of what it wanted to do. And here it's just so bang on. It's just like, unbelievably on the money, on the mark, that it's almost shocking, in the context of the episodes that surround it. I mean, I'll tell you something. When I watched these two episodes, I was just like a mess. I was just like, particularly with closure, it's just like, it shattered me. It just, like, emotionally, I was just undone.
Well, I had like a similar reaction, but it's only on the last two occasions I saw closure, and I don't want to be too sappy or anything, but the only thing I can really put it down to is that the last two times I've seen closure is since my daughter was born, and I don't know, something's just changed. And
oh, sure, no, absolutely, of course, it gives you an entirely different context.
Definitely. Just finally, I thought it's probably worth briefly discussing Tina Mulder, Rebecca Tulin. I'm trying to remember just now. Is this the first time we see her in LA?
Yeah, I believe it is, yeah.
So, I don't know, she's always felt kind of underserved as a character to me, She does get some good material at times, but maybe they could have used her more or something, I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Very good actress, always gave tremendous performances with very, almost sort of like emotional porn kind of scenes that she was put in, but she was always very good, and she always understated them. I mean, one of my favorite performances by that actress was on Demons. Very difficult, very challenging scene to play, and was just absolutely stunning. And David was also very good on that episode as well. Yeah, always very good. Really not given a lot to do here. It's one of these things where a good actor puts their mark on not only the scenes they perform, but the scenes around them. And I think that you kind of feel the power of her character and her performance, throughout the two-parter. It reminds me of, the classic example I always give is like, Marlon Brando is only in Apocalypse Now for like, I don't know, less than 10 minutes, but the entire film is about him. And his performance, sort of validates that. You're this sense of anticipation of getting up the river, getting to Kurtz. And then, when Marlon Brando, his charisma and his screen presence, it pays off. And I think in this case, it's not that same kind of story at all, obviously, but, you feel the loss of this character because, the person playing that character was always so good.
I suppose another example would be, I think Anthony Hopkins is only in The Silence of the Lambs for 15 to 20 minutes, which you wouldn't think. If you were asked to say how much he was in, you'd probably put it a lot higher.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great analogy.
Okay, I guess we'll wrap up there. I think we've adequately conveyed that we, the two of us at least, are big appreciators of this episode.
Absolutely.
So, Chris, I'll speak to you in a few episodes' time for a couple more season 7 outings. Tomorrow on the podcast, it's Closure, the episode that wraps up this two-parter, and that's followed by X-Cops. In the meantime, listeners, you can find us on Twitter at the X_cast. You can find us on Facebook. If you type in Xcast, you'll find our page and our group, X-Files Basement, the Xcast Podcast Fan Group. But until next time, trust no one.